Okay, good, good. All right, so let's go over the Gemara that we learned. We're on page 49b, and we did this Gemara right before the Mishnah, and then we did the Mishnah. The Gemara right before the Mishnah here spoke about a contradiction, because one place it seems that Reb Meir holds a kazayas and Reb Yehuda holds a kibetza. Kazayas means an olive, a kibetza means an egg, and that would be the measurement that is considered significant. Now, I should mention that in general, the Hebrew word kibetza is generally substituted for the Aramaic word kibeya, because kibetza sounds like the testicle, so it's not so like honorable way of speaking. So kibeya is generally the way you read that word. In other words, it says kibetza, but generally when you speak about it, you say kibeya. In fact, even the tractate, when we call it, we don't say Masechta Beitza, which is a tractate. We say Masechta Beya. But so the one place, Reb Meir says Kazayas and Reb Yehuda says Kibeya, and the other place, Reb Yehuda says Kazayas and Reb Meir says Kibeya. So the Gemara finds this to be a contradiction. Now, it also could have ramifications as to what the final halacha is. Because theoretically,
if you want to call it that.
I'm sorry, what did you say? Oh, so the reason why
I understand that.
Ezra, you have to mute us. Ezra's on the telephone.
Yeah. Let me mute everyone. Okay, I'm sorry. It's just a little harder when I'm on my my phone.
Okay, we're done.
Okay, I muted everyone, I think. This could have halachic ramifications, because generally when there's an argument, Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, the halacha follows Reb Yehuda. So, if we want to know for sure, are we correct in whose opinion is saying what? So it could have halachic ramifications, not necessarily, because even though generally we would, if there's an argument, Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, we follow Reb Yehuda, there are alternative reasons, there are additional reasons why sometimes, like if we see another opinion follows Reb Meir, that would be a reason for us to follow Reb Meir, and so on. So there could be other options as well, but it could have halachic ramifications. When you want to know exactly who says what, there's reason to know that. And additionally, it does seem to be a contradiction here between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda here, and Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda regarding the laws of bringing holy meat, outside of Yerushalayim. So that was a question our Gemara asked. So let's talk about this practically. Reb Meir holds, at least in our Mishnah, that in order to be moitzi others for a zimun, you need a kazayas. You need the size of an olive. You need to eat the size of an olive. Reb Yehuda said you need to eat the size of a kibeya, an egg. And Tosfos over here, I mentioned that says it's not only for zimun. Actually, they're really discussing the actual laws of benching. Do you need to bench when you eat a kazayas, an olive size, or do you need to bench when you eat a kibeya, the size of an egg? Now, this is very practical, because once in a while, let's say you go to you're at a Shabbos meal and they didn't have enough bread or something, and you had a very tiny piece of hamaitzi, right? you really can't bench the Brochos Hamos, and you can't do the grace after meal if you had such a small amount of bread. So you washed, and it's problematic for you to bench, because if you hardly, you had a little crumb of bread, you do have to say hamaitzi on it, but and you would wash you should have washed without a bracha, because a bracha for washing is only recited if you have a significant amount of an egg size. But for benching after the meal, there's an argument here: do you bench for an egg size or for an olive size? Now, another thing that I did mention yesterday regarding this whole discussion is we have to really figure this out. Is this considered a rabbinic law or is this biblical law? Are they arguing about the biblical law of benching, or are they arguing about the rabbinic law of benching? So the simple understanding would be that biblically you need to have this avata satisfaction in order to bench. In order to bench, you need to be satisfied for on a biblical level. If you want to say the grace after meal, you need to have enough to be satisfied. But on a rabbinic level, that's what it would seem like our Gemara is talking about. On a rabbinic level, you would be obligated to bench either for a kazayas, according to Reb Meir, and for a kabeya, according to Reb Yehuda. Why would we say this, that this is only rabbinic? Well, there's reason to say it's biblical, and there's reason to say it's rabbinic here. The reason to say that our Gemara is talking on a biblical level is because the Gemara does bring verses. V'achalta, v'savata, achila sheyesh basviya. The Gemara brought verses that imply either a kazayas or a kabeya. So that would mean, if you're bringing a verse, generally that means that it's on a biblical level. We're talking on a biblical level. So that would be, and there are opinions, like the Rashba learns our Gemara, that it's talking on a biblical level. That our Gemara is saying on a biblical level, if you eat a kazayas, you have to bench biblically. But the other opinions, and one of them is Taisvis on the side of our Gemara, says that our Gemara is talking about on a rabbinic level, and that's what would make sense logically. That's what we always assume, that if you eat enough for satisfaction, that's what the verse says, v'achalta v'savata, at least on a simple level. But the reason why Tosfos wants to say that it would be on a rabbinic level, you would have to bench for a kazayas or a kabeya. The reason to say that would be a previous Gemara seems to imply that. What did a previous Gemara tell us? There was a previous Gemara that said that I said in the Torah, Hashem says, I said in the Torah, when you're satisfied, you have to bench. And these Jews are so special, they bench even for a kazayas and a kabeya. For sure, I'm going to show them favoritism. So that Gemara earlier on page 20 implies, like, biblically you have to be satisfied, and on a rabbinic level you would bench for an olive size or an egg size, and it actually fits with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said that Reb Meir says an olive size and Reb Yehuda says an egg size, and that Gemara there said I said, and you have to be satisfied to bench, and they bench even for an egg, even for an olive or an egg. Why does it say both an olive or an egg? It's because it's referring to both of these views, Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. So it sounds like it's only rabbinic, and that's Tosfos, one of Tosfos's proofs that it must be that it's rabbinic. And another proof Tosfos has is you have a case where the Gemara talks about you ate a measurement that's rabbinic. Now, if you want to tell me that the olive size and the egg size is biblical, so Tosfos says, so what size would be rabbinic that you have to say grace after meal, right? What would be the rabbinic size? It must be that that this is rabbinic. This is rabbinic size, and the biblical amount would be satisfaction. Now, the Rashba learns that our Gemara argues on the previous Gemara, and our Gemara holds that it's that was one opinion over there. But our Gemara holds that eating an olive or an egg would be on a biblical level. Now, so we have both of these ways of learning, but the commonly accepted way is that in eating an olive or an egg, we follow Tosfos over here, and that it's only rabbinic. Now, the Gemara's problem is that it seems to contradict another place where we have these two views, because so our Gemara says Reb Meir follows the olive rule and Reb Yehuda follows the egg rule, and the other Gemara over there talked about taking holy meat that's called kachim kalim. It's from certain sacrifices, and you're allowed to eat that meat in the wall of Yerushalayim. And if you take it out of the wall of Yerushalayim, it has to be burned. And it's supposed to be burned in the appropriate place to burn it is either on the Temple Mount or a certain place on the Temple Mount. And they would actually use the atzei ma'aracha to burn it, the wood that's donated towards the mizbeach, to the altar. So the logic says, go back and burn it where in the holy place. However, the Gemara says that there is a leniency. You don't have to go back. When is that? It depends how far away you are from the place from Yerushalayim. So if you're past Soifim, which we translated as that you can't see Yerushalayim from there, or you can't see the Beis Hamikdash from there. So if you've passed that area, so then you would not have to go back, but you could actually burn it bimakoimai, in his place, wherever you are. You just burn it there. The rabbis didn't obligate you to go back and burn it. So and burn it in the place of the Beis Hamikdash, or in the Temple Mount. So so the bottom line is, how much do you need in order to have to go? So if you do need to go back, let's say, what would be the measurement that would obligate you to go back and not just burn it where you are? So number one is in location. The rabbis didn't obligate you if you're far away. Number two, the rabbis didn't obligate you if it's a very small amount. And so what is that small amount that you would not need to go back, and what is the cutoff point where you would need to go back? So Reb Meir says that the cutoff point is a kabeya, is an egg. If it's less than an egg, you would not need to go back. Now, that doesn't seem to fit with Reb Meir's opinion here with regard to Brochos, where he says the kazayas, an olive. There he says an egg. Now, the Reb Yehuda says the cutoff point is the olive, and that's where if you have less than that, you would not need to go back to Yerushalayim and burn it in Temple Mount. Instead, you could burn it where you are. That's Reb Yehuda's opinion, that it's a kazayas, an olive size, and that doesn't fit with Reb Yehuda over here. Reb Yehuda says that the cutoff point is over here. Reb Yehuda says the amount of the bench is a kabeya, is an egg. So there he says an olive, here he says an egg. Reb Meir is the opposite. So the Gemara has one simple answer at first, and that is that, it must be a mistake. That's the first answer. That, in other words, one of these two places, you're going to have to switch the names. Either Reb Meir is going to be the kazayas in both, and Reb Yehuda is going to be kabeya in both, or it's going to be the opposite. So Rashi over here tells us that you switch the names. One second. I should say it's Tosfos. Tosfos over here tells us that when you switch the names of our Gemara, and therefore it ends up being that Rabbi Yehuda is the opinion of Kazayas in both places, and Reb Meir is the opinion of Kabeya in both places. Reb Meir is Kabeya, Reb Yehuda is Kazayas. Now that actually fits very well, because what ends up happening is that who is the halacha like? How much do you need to eat in order to bench? Now I mentioned to wash with a bracha al natilas yadayim, you do need an egg size. That's a separate story. But let's talk about benching. The grace after meal to bench. How much do you need in order to bench? So we follow the Kazayas law. Who should that follow? Now, whenever there's an argument, Reb Yehuda, Reb Meir, we follow Reb Yehuda. So if you switch our Mishnah, then everything fits with the halacha, right? It fits very well. The halacha is Kazayas. That's how we follow. We follow the Kazayas rule. And that would be Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir. Reb Yehuda, the halacha follows Reb Yehuda whenever you have those two argue. Not always, there could be exceptions maybe, but generally Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, the halacha follows Reb Yehuda, and that would be the that would seemingly be a good answer to answer this contradiction. However, Abaye doesn't like it. Abaye says, no. You have to differentiate between the two cases. These different laws have, there's a difference between these laws. And so Abaye goes deeper into it, and he says, let's try to understand. Over here, the reason for the argument is based on the psukim. What does Visavata imply? And again, there are two ways to learn this, as I mentioned earlier. We're either actually learning a halacha from the verses, or we're explaining how the rabbis based their decree and their rule on the verse, but it's not an actual law from the verse. So again, there's both ways of learning this. Either this is actual halacha from a pasuk, it's biblical, or it's only rabbinic. Let me just mute everyone again here. Okay. So the Reb Meir says you learn it from the achalta, you learn achila, that you have to eat in order to be obligated to bench, you eat. The savata, Reb Meir says, means drinking. Now, what does he mean when he says drinking? So the truth is there are different ways of learning this. Eating, he says, is a kizayas, and drinking, you would also need to bench if you drank, or you would need to say the bracha achreina of, drinking grape juice or wine, drinking if a person drank olive oil, theoretically, in a way that's edible. So the bracha achreina for drinking would be a bracha achas me'ein shalish. It would be the like ala michya bracha for the 7 species, because that's what it's referring to. And so Reb Meir says v'achalta means eating, v'savata means drinking, and this would be an obligation to bench after just simply eating or simply drinking. How much is the measurement for eating? Kazayas. How much is a measurement for drinking? That's an interesting discussion, which maybe we'll get to, but let's put it off now for a moment. Let's talk about the kazayas is for eating, and that would be Reb Meir's reason for holding that you need to say Berchas Hamazon for a kazayas for an olive size. Now, Reb Yehuda would say, V'achalta v'savata means eating that has satisfaction. So the way I translated it yesterday was I was trying to answer a question. The Gemara says eating that has satisfaction isn't kebeya, is the size of an egg. The problem is, are people really satisfied with the size of an egg? So so it is a little hard to understand what does the Gemara mean. In other words, most people, you're not satisfied when you just eat the size of an egg. You eat more than that. An egg, I mean, I don't know anyone who eats one egg and they're satisfied. Even you go to breakfast in a restaurant, they have either 2 or 3 eggs, and that includes bread and includes salad and includes the coffee and includes, that's what you would think.
Home fries.
And fries, right? Home fries. But so one egg doesn't seem to be enough to be satisfied. But our Gemara says that has sevilla is satisfaction. So I said maybe eating that could have satisfaction, maybe that's what it means. That in other words, if you ate an egg, there could be times maybe you're satisfied, but I don't see any of the commentaries translating it that way. The one commentary that deals with this, he brings another sefer called the Shibbolei Aleket, which says that there is satisfaction of the throat, of the garoin, a satisfaction of the throat of the throat is satisfied when it eats the size of an egg, and so if you think about it that way, that's how he's explaining the pasuk. So it means and so I'm sort of retracting from the way I translated it yesterday. Because I don't see any source that explains it that way. So instead, we're translating it achila sheyesh bo svia, an eating that has satisfaction, which means the satisfaction of the throat, and that would be ve'ezuzu. That would be a kebeya. That's a egg size, and so that would be the amount, the measure to satisfy that you could call satisfaction, and that would be according to Rabbi Yehuda, the amount in order to bench. Kebeya would be an egg. So you have an argument, Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, what is the amount to bench? And it's based on psukim, based on verses, or in either they're specific, they're learning it precisely from these verses, or it's how the rabbis based their law on these verses, on hints, so to speak, from the verses. Now, when it comes to the other law, which has to do with returning, going back to burn the holy meats in Yerushalayim, in the mountain of the Beis Hamikdash, or on the Beis Hamikdash itself. So on that you have an argument in logic. Reb Meir Savar, what does it mean logic? It means, what do you compare the law to? Is it compared to Tumah, the laws of impurity? Or do you compare it to the laws of prohibition, of the prohibited measure that's subject to penalties? So that's what they're arguing about when it comes to these laws. It's more of a logic question, and therefore there's room to say that even Reb Meir, that says regarding benching that you bench for a kazayas, but when it comes to the laws of returning to burn meat that went outside of Yerushalayim, when it comes to those laws, Reb Meir might hold the kebeya because he compares it to Tumah. And Rabbi Yehuda, who says here that by benching you follow the law of an egg, kebeya, he could hold over there regarding the returning to burn the meat, the holy meat that was taken outside of the walls of Yerushalayim that he holds over there, the opposite of what he holds here, that he holds over there, may be a kazayas, an olive. And the reason is because what is the measurement of prohibition of meat outside of the meat, holy meat? The measurement of holy meat, the prohibition would be the size of a kazayas. That's the measurement of all prohibited matters. Eating them from the Torah is all things that it's prohibited to eat. It generally follows the rule of kazayas. So that's how the answer that Abaye gives would answer this contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda saying one place kazayas and the other place kabeya, and Rabbi Meir saying one place kazayas, one place kabeya. It's not a contradiction. They're talking about two different laws, and one laws are based on verses, the other laws are based on a svara, a logic. What other laws should you compare it to? And so that really concludes the previous Gemara. Now, the problem that you'll have with according to Abaye, who does the halacha follow? So if you're not switching the laws, so it ends up that Reb Meir holds the law of kazayas, and
Yehuda.
And Reb Yehuda holds the law of a kabeya. And the problem is, that's not the halacha. That doesn't seem like it fits. We follow the halacha follows kazayas, not kabeya. Here it would seem like the halacha. If you follow Abaye here, it would seem that the halacha would follow Rabbi Yehuda, and it would be kabeya. So back on Mem Ches Amud Aleph, if you turn back on Mem Ches Amud Aleph, so you have over there where it says that Reb Chia bar Abba said the name of Rabbi Yochanan that that what Shimon ben Shatach did was not the appropriate thing. He drank a cup of wine and he said the Berchas Hamazon. That's not the appropriate thing. You really need to eat a kazayas. So the fact that Rabbi Yochanan paskins over there that that you need to eat a kazayas, so that would be a source that's what we would follow. And in other words, even though Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda argue, and normally we would follow Rabbi Yehuda, but here we would follow because we know Rabbi Yochanan paskin that way. So therefore, we would follow Rabbi Yochanan, and that was his halacha earlier, that you can only be mitzi others if you eat a kazayas. He said it pretty clearly, and there may be other places as well where he mentions this.
We mentioned it with the
What?
server that wanted to do a zimun. They needed him for a zimun. They said if he ate kazayas.
Right. The truth is, the Mishnah said Ad Kazai, right? That he ate a kazayas. It does seem like the Mishnah seems to paskin that way. Right. But there is another place here. You see, Tosfos brings another source where we had earlier on Lamed Ches Amud Beis, which we learned a while back, where it says Achal Kazayas Maliach, where he ate a kazayas something salted, and the Gemara over there says, Amar Reb Chia bar Abba. Reb Chia bar Abba says, I saw Reb Yochanan she'achal zayis meliach, that he ate an olive that was salted, uberach olav tchila b'saif, and he made a bracha in the beginning and in the end, and so it was a salted olive, and he recited a bracha rishayna and a bracha achrayna. You see that an olive is enough to make a bracha achrayna for olives, and the same halacha would apply seemingly for bread. In other words, that the bracha achrayna is it's a blanket rule for all bracha achraynas. This, in other words, this law doesn't only apply to bread; it applies to anything that any candy that you're eating, any cake, any fruit, anything that you're eating, vegetables. The bracha achrayna, the after bracha, would follow this law of how much you need to eat. You know, is it a kabeya or a kazayas? And we follow the rule of kazayas. So just like Rabbi Yochanan over there clearly paskin that way, so that's why the halacha would be a kazayas. So then we learned this Mishnah that how do you recite the benching? So the benching, or the zimun, I should say. How do you recite the zimun? And so that's what the Mishnah dealt with. Does it switch with numerous levels of people or not? And how does it switch? So the first opinion mentioned that when you have 3, you say nevarech she'achalnu mishaloi, and when you have 4, you say Baruch Hu. Now, what does Baruch Hu really mean? Baruch Hu means you're telling the others in like a command, bless. And the reason you can say Baruch Hu and not Nivarech is because Nivarech means we together, we should bless, and Baruch Hu means you're telling them in a plural, bless. And so you're talking about you're saying to them, they should bless in a command way. But you're telling them and almost like excluding yourself. And the reason why you could say such a thing is because they could bench on their own without you. There are 3 people without you. So if you have only 3 people, you say nevarech. If you have a 4th person, the Mishnah is a little vague. Is it that you have to say Baruch Hu, or you could say Baruch Hu? We'll see a little later what the answer to that question is. But and the Gemara will say that it means you could say Baruch Hu. But at least at this point, it sounds like you're supposed to say Baruch Hu. And now when you have 10 people, the Mizamein, the person who's leading the benching, says Nivarech Alekenu. And if you have 11 people or more, you would say Baruch Hu, because you could tell Baruch Hu Elokenu She'achalnu mishaloi. And once you reach that level of 10 or 11, I should say, then once you reach the level of 11 people, doesn't matter 11 people or 100,000 people. It's all the same.
Rabbi,
yes.
I'm thinking maybe you are only able to be moitzi to 2 people and not 3. And that's why if it's more than 2, you have to say Baruch Hu, because you blessed already, they should bless for themselves.
Are you referring to the Zimun bracha, or are you referring to the whole Berchas Hamazon blessings?
I'm referring to any blessing. Maybe you're only able to be moitzi for 2 people when you bless for somebody else.
What about 10? You say Nevarech by 10.
That's a minyan.
Uh-huh.
Maybe and then 11 again, you're not able to. They have to say Baruch Hu at 11.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't really sound that way. So what would that mean? So in other words, what you're saying is
at 4 they have to say Baruch Hashem and so forth. You know.
So what Ben wants to say is that when you say Nevarech she'achalnu mishaloi, then that means that the leader answers with everyone else. Baruch she'achalnu mishaloi v'tavai chayinu. The leader has to also say it. But when you do 4, and all he does is says Baruch Hu she'achalnu mishaloi, and everyone else answers, okay. He's telling them to bless, and they answer Baruch she'achalnu mishaloi v'tavai chayinu. But you're saying the Mazamein doesn't say it. Now the problem
that's what it sounds like. I don't know.
The problem with that would be, why not? In other words, he's not being mitzi them either way. He's none of the options here. In other words, whether there's 3 or 4, he's telling them to bench. He's just also bench. In other words, he's not saying, I'm going to have you in mind. He's saying, Nivarech, let's all bench together. And everyone does answer. Baruch she'achalnu mishaloi v'tavai chayinu. Everyone does say it. So therefore, it doesn't really seem to fit that what you're saying, that he's going to have him in mind, that he's going to have, only have them in mind with one of these options and not the other. You know what I mean? It doesn't flow.
Okay.
So that was the first part of the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah jumps, and the way I explained it, the Mishnah jumps to a new part, and it's really a new opinion. The new part, the Mishnah doesn't clarify itself, but that's the way you have to learn it. The Mishnah says, now what do you do when you have 100? So in 100, this new opinion says, Nevarech Hashem Elokeinu. What happens if you have 101? 101 is Baruch Hu Hashem Elokeinu she'achalnu mishaloi. What happens if you have 1,000?
You add a couple more words.
You have to keep adding other praises of Hashem. 1,000, you say Nevarech LaHashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael. Nevarech LaHashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael. And 1,001, you say 1,001. I lost the place. But be'elefahu, Aimer Baruch Hu Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael. You say Baruch Hu, not Nevarech. You say Baruch Hu. Beriboy, when you have 10,000, you say Aimer. You say Nevarech LaHashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael Elokei Tzavakos Yoshev Akruvim. All these praises of Hashem. Hashem, our God, the God of Israel, the God of legions, the Yoshev Akruvim, who dwells between the cherubs, and Alamazin She'achalnu. Now, Beriboy for 10,000 Vahu and 10,001, you would say Baruch Hu instead of Nevarech. Baruch Hu Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael Elokei Tzavakos Yoshev Akruvim Alamazin She'achalnu She'achalnu. Okay. Now, the Mishnah then says the same way you call out to them to say to praise Hashem, that is exactly how they're supposed to answer. And so what does the congregation answer? Baruch Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael Elokei Tzavakos Yoshev Akruvim Al HaMazon She'achalnu. So the same way you called out for them to do the grace, that's how those are the words and praises that they use when they answer. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that the reason why you change according to the amount of people is because of a verse. And the verse says, "B'makelos Baruch Hu Elokim Hashem Makor Yisrael." It says in groups you praise Hashem, the God, the source of Israel, from the source of Israel, and so therefore, depending on the size of the group, it's a different bracha. Each group has their way of praising Hashem, b'makelos in plural, and that would be a reason to switch with 10, with 100, with 1,000, with 10,000. And now the Gemara, the Mishnah goes back and says, and Rabbi Akiva says, just like we find with a shul that 10 is the number. And you say Baruch Hu es Hashem, just like we find with the shul, that whether you have a lot or a little, you say Baruch Hu es Hashem. So the same thing would be with regard to benching, that you wouldn't switch it if you have a lot more people. And Rabbi Yishmael says it's not Baruch Hu es Hashem, but it's Baruch Hu es Hashem HaMevayrach. Blessed is Hashem who is blessed. And the reason why Rabbi Yishmael says you say Baruch Hu es Hashem HaMevayrach is because you don't want to exclude yourself. You're telling them to bless. You wouldn't want to exclude yourself. And therefore, you say HaMevayrach, who is blessed, meaning that you yourself are acknowledging that Hashem is blessed. And so